All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Business of Speaking show. I am your host, Tim McDonald, and so honored to be joined by my guest today, Crystal Washington. How are you doing, Crystal?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me, Tim.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here. It's a great way to end my week with my show recording. So I can't wait to dive into our conversation. But before we do, just so everybody understands, the Business of Speaking show is really a show not to focus on what speakers talk about on stage, but really about their journey to the stage and what they've learned after they've gotten on the stage to turn it into a successful and sustainable business for them. So I'm always looking forward to some great stories. And this is really for anybody who's thinking about getting involved in speaking, just starting in speaking, or really anywhere along their path, because we can all learn from each other. And I'm a big believer in community, and that's what we're trying to create here. So with that, Crystal, let me dive in and just to say, how did you get involved? What's your story of how you got involved in speaking?
So I've been speaking my whole life. Like I was the kid that whatever school I went to, whatever church I went to, if there was a play, if there was a speech, go grab Crystal. She can memorize huge amounts of information and she can deliver, right? So I've always done speeches, but professionally I got involved when I had started a marketing company and I had clients that were getting great results. And this was back when social media was at its infancy. Okay. So Facebook was only college students. Twitter was just coming out, so it was very much in its infancy. MySpace was still like a leader, so that's how far back we're talking here. But my clients were getting great results. And as a result, because most people are members of professional organizations, they would say, Crystal, would you mind coming to our monthly meeting of blah, blah, blah? We need a speaker. And I would do it as a favor to my clients. Well, Tim, I started getting so many requests for doing it, especially if I'd speak to one, more people would say, oh, well, can you come to our event? That I just started thinking to myself, short-sighted and not realizing that professional speaking was a thing. I can't keep doing these. This isn't billable hours because I was doing it as favors. And so I remember when I decided, okay, look, I got to just start saying no to these. The first organization, I said, I'm so sorry. I just don't have time. They said, but we'll pay you. And I said, oh, and I and I went online and I researched and I was like, oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. And so that's pretty much where the transition into speaking started, because I saw, this is a lucrative move, but not only that, I enjoy it. I love it. People seem to connect with the way that I communicate. I can take very complex topics and make them very simple. And so that's really where it started.
Well, that's so interesting. And I'm just kind of curious when, that first person offered you the money to speak, did you feel anything different when you went up on that stage compared to all the other times when you were doing it for free, basically?
Well, for sure, there was pressure, but I'll tell you when I felt the most pressure. So I had just started. So now I'm speaking and I'm getting those honorariums. Okay. So, those little pieces of money. And I ended up winning this award for my marketing firm. And at this award ceremony, I met a speaker named Karen McCullough, and she'd been a professional speaker for many years. And to make a very long story short, she ended up taking me under her wing and she was like, I'm going to turn you into a professional speaker, because I'd helped her with some things. And so one of the first things we talked about was, she said, well, how much are you getting for your speaking engagements? And I told her, and she was like, absolutely not. From this point on, and she told me that I needed to charge in the thousands, right? A few thousand. And I remember thinking, oh, you mean that people will pay me that much for 1 hour of my time? And so the first client that came to me after I upped my fees was a very prominent grocery store company. And when I quoted my fee, it was $500 more than their budget, Tim. And so I felt, but still, it was still a lot of money, still thousands I was making. And I remember going in there and the level of pressure that I felt to deliver excellence. I always wanted to do a great job, period. But there, it was such a pressure. But what was interesting, and I'm so glad it happened this way, is at the end, the client rushed over to me and she had this worried look on her face. And I was like, oh gosh, what did I do wrong? And she said, Crystal, and she gave me a big hug. She said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I'm thinking, for what? And she said, I'm so sorry. You are worth every dollar of your fee. I feel so bad that we couldn't just find the extra $500. I am so sorry. You were worth way more than that. And that's when something clicked for me. And so now I charge probably 3 times what I did then, right? But it's that was all part of the process. And yes, there's definitely more pressure when there's money involved. But I think, we should always want to do our best. But yeah, when you're being paid, it's a different level. That's why when people approach me, Tim, and they say, well, they want to be professional speakers. And I say, okay, well, why? What do you want to speak on? And like, oh, I have this amazing story of how I overcome, I conquered this or overcame this, said overconquered. And I just want to share my story with the world. I said, that's great. Who's going to pay for that is my question. I don't have the answer for you. But once you do, the delivery is different when you're being paid a premium to speak than if you're just speaking to motivate a church or a nonprofit in your free time. And so making sure that I communicate and just being honest with people about that.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's a great point. So about how many years ago was it that you really started getting paid to speak? Do you remember?
About 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't too far from you doing the free talks for clients that you went into getting paid for it then.
Well, because I was generating spinoff, but unpaid spinoff before I knew what spinoff was. And so that's why it went so fast, because it went from me doing a few favors to now all these calls that I wasn't getting paid for because I didn't know it was a career path.
So can you explain spinoff just so we can make sure everybody understands what you mean? Because I'm a big believer in making sure that everybody understands.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. Great question. Spinoff is when you speak to a group and there's other people there that want to hire you for more events, or maybe the organization itself, maybe another department, or someone else is like, oh, we have this event coming up. So spinoff is gold in professional speaking. If you're doing a great job, especially if you speak to associations in particular, you speaking to an association should spin off 2 to 3 other pieces of business if it's a large enough audience, right? So that's what spinoff is. It's really what keeps professional speakers in business.
And that is a key component, I'm guessing, as far as even when you were doing it for non-paid and then you started getting paid, you were always looking for who was the audience that was going to be, part of the people that you were going to be talking to. So it could present these other opportunities for you.
Right. And because I know that you have speakers of all levels that listen to your show, Tim, I like to throw this out here too. Especially when you're beginning, you may not know this. There's going to be groups that say, oh, if you speak to us for free, we have all these organizations represented in the audience, you can get business. That's normally not true. You need people in the audience who have very specific job titles, who have the ability to hire you and sign a check. So just because you have representation from 100 Fortune 500 companies, if those people are not in positions to directly make the decision, they can like you, they can tell somebody at work, but who says they have any sway? Most of the time they don't.
And was that something you learned like really early, or did you learn the hard way of actually experiencing that?
Well, I learned pretty early on, because the one thing we haven't told anyone yet, Tim, on your show, is that before all of this, before I had my marketing company, I was a salesperson. So I know sales, and I know when someone is saying, oh, we'll give you, if you come out here, we'll give you exposure. I'm like, if you called me, you know who I am. I don't need exposure. Plus people die of exposure. That's not a good thing. I don't want exposure.
Oh, that's so funny.
You could be arrested for too much exposure.
So, I'm kind of curious, as you've, evolved over the 10 years, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen and maybe still face today, in getting speaking?
So I think number one is knowing your value. Okay. So in the beginning, I had the whole humility thing. I gave the story of how the one speaker told me to up my fees. It's interesting because when I look at most of my fee raisings I've done over the years, it's not been at my own prompting. It's because someone else. So after I was at that one fee that the speaker told me, try to get around here, the next fee jump actually came as a result of I had a client who hired me a couple times. And one time we were talking, he just started laughing and he said, Crystal, can I tell you something? And I said, yes. He said, your fees are way too low. He's like, you are worth so much more than what you're charging. He said, and while we enjoy the fact that we get you at this deep discount, he said, can I suggest you raise your fees? And I was like, this is an older Caucasian C-suite gentleman. And I was like, oh. And so that was my first fee raise. The next one came as a result of one of the bureaus that I work with frequently that probably generates, I don't know, maybe 20% of my business, because I generate most of it myself. But they said, hey, if you go to this level, we can sell you at this level. We promise we can if you up it to here. And so that was one of the last fee hikes. Now, the very last fee hike I did was just mine, because by this time I figured out what the indicators are. And when you start getting so much business that you're exhausted, it's like, oh, wait, I need to up my fee a little bit. So I think fee is a huge deal for many speakers, because I know so many that started at the same time that I did, Tim, that never raised their fees. They're still stuck in the cycle of speaking for exposure from time to time for groups that can never hire them. And so knowing your value is massive.
And I'm just kind of, I know you mentioned, the couple of times that, one you were prompted, another one, somebody suggested it. What are, some of those other factors when you make your decision of doing that come into play for you that you just kind of know it's the right time to try it?
In terms of raising your fee?
Yes.
So I think a really good indicator is when you have a lot of business coming in the door, when you're in demand. It's easier to raise your fee then than when you're not in demand, because if you're not in demand, there might be some things you need to tweak to make sure you're even worth the value you're charging now. But if you're in demand, there's a good opportunity for you to raise your fees. When you write books, there's a good opportunity. Different partnerships you have with recognizable names. If you start getting enough of these Fortune 500 companies or big name associations or government groups, all of those things can trigger a rise in fees. The other thing you can do is you can actually start playing around with fees. So let's say you have your base fee, but you can also start offering packages in a proposal. So yes, this is my normal fee, but if we go up to this level, I can do this extra thing. If we go up to this level, I can do this, and present 3. If you start getting a lot of people wanting to pay more for you, then you think, okay, well, that might actually need to be my new base fee if all these people are willing to pay this for me just to speak and for 2 additional webinars. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And you bring up something interesting is that I wanted to explore too, is this whole thing of, getting paid to speak, right? And a lot of people think it's just when you're up on the stage. And can you tell us, how do you generate revenue outside of just being up on the stage?
Well, me, for the most part, I'm a keynote speaker. And so that really is where 93% of my business revenue comes from. Now, I know there's other speakers that have coaching programs and do a lot of consulting. I don't do those things. I used to do more consulting, but the keynoting took over so much and it required me to travel so much that I realized that I couldn't serve too many masters and be excellent at it. And so I dedicated myself to keynoting. Now, what's brilliant and amazing, and I'm so thankful for, Tim, is the fact that even though we're going through all these things with COVID-19 and it's shifting the perspective, I was able to pivot or shift very fast, not intentionally, but because my clients have such a trusting relationship with me that maybe 2 weeks into this thing, I started getting phone calls and my clients were like, well, Crystal, are you able to do webinars? Because we really need a webinar on teaching people how to set up an office. Crystal, could you do a webinar on how do you maintain relationships during social distancing when everything's via Zoom? And so without me putting out a single marketing material or email saying I could do it, I just automatically started getting in calls for webinars and video projects. So now that's where all my business revenue is coming from, and future in-person bookings. But I think there's no one way in speaking, because there's some people I'm sure you've had on your show that say, oh, you need to have so many streams of revenue. You need to do it this way. You need to do it that way. And I think they're all brilliant. At the end of the day, we all have to do what works for us, and results are the only thing that matters. That bottom line and what clients are saying about you. So your reputation paired with what your bottom line is, that's all that matters. No one else's opinion actually matters.
No, I think that's one of the things that really prompted me to want to do this show, is because I was having so many private conversations and hearing so many different business models that it was just fascinating to me how many things work for different people. And so I just love hearing, what works for everybody. So, when you were starting, and I know you got a lot based upon your clients and everything, but how did you really market yourself, and what did you find worked the best, and what maybe did you try that didn't work the way you thought it was going to?
So in the beginning with marketing, I would say, beginning as a speaker, there were 3 things that I had that I think gave me a really great competitive advantage that allowed me to grow my business much faster than what is standard in this industry. Number 1, I had a great mentor, Karen McCullough. So whatever she told me to do, I did it. And I ignored most other people's advice. I found one person who already achieved what I wanted, and I decided to take their one path. It's kind of like you can't take directions from 3 people. three different directions because you're not going to get to your area. So that was number one. Number two, I had a topic people were already searching for, Tim. So it was social media. So social media for marketing, social media for sales, social media for HR, whatever. But at the time, well, now I speak about much more than that. It was social media. So people were already doing Google searches for it. That's key. And then the last thing is I understood systems. I'm a systematic thinker. And so when it came to prospecting and using CRMs and making sure that nothing was ever dropped in my speaking engagements, you know, Tim, many of my testimonial letters actually mention my assistant and my systems by name. They're like, we've never worked with such an organized speaker. Can you give us your outline of your processes so that we can use this in working with speakers in the future? So I gave you those three things. Now, when it came to marketing, social media was a big part of that because I understood how to optimize within social media. And so, for instance, I remember my first two international speaking engagements were the result of YouTube and Facebook and me knowing how to optimize my presence. So I would say social media was a big one. And then once I came in to speak, I did such an excellent job and I managed to capture most of the attendees' contact information because they had to do text to join to get notes for my presentations. Between that, so now the email marketing to people who've already seen me, the social media optimization, and just doing a good job. When I show up, I show out, Tim. I give it my all. Between those three things, it kept generating more business.
I love it. And, you know, I know you mentioned, you know, your assistant and your systems that you use. You know, what is it that makes, you know, people say, we've never seen this before? What stands out to you, you know, that you're making yourself stand out to them?
So two things. On the back end, it's actually the fact that as soon as they say, hey, we're ready to have a contract, everything's done digitally. My assistant contacts them. She's like, hey, just so that you know, we have this process. We're going to send you all these things on a timeline. If you need anything before then, feel free to email or call me. The level of service, and Regina, who is my assistant, is on it. And so they don't have to think about anything. Once they sign the contract and do the deposit, they get reminders for everything. She's setting up those follow-up calls. She's sending them flight information. She's checking in on AV stuff. They can sit back and not one ball is going to drop. So that's on the back end. On the front end, I don't know any other speaker on this planet, and this is not arrogance, this is me just being honest, that customizes their presentations to the extent that I do for each and individual audience. And so when your audience realizes that it's not a canned speech and that you actually know who they are in the room and you're calling some of them out by name and you're using some of them as examples, how do you compete with that? And it's not so much about competition, but that stands out in their mind. So a lot of my testimonial letters have mentioned the level of customization that Crystal does is mind blowing. So I let people know I see them on both ends. It's really about valuing people and letting them know that you see them.
I love that. And how, you know, what I'm really fascinated by this because you're going up on stage. You might know some of the, you know, the companies or the attendees or the industry that you're in, but how do you actually get to the point of like knowing who some of the people are that you can call them out by name?
You ask the client. You ask the client a lot of questions. So I have a whole question thing I go through. My assistant starts to pull certain files for me ahead of time. I do online research. So it takes a lot of effort. And it would be easier if I showed up and gave a canned speech every place I went. And I think I could have an okay career based on that. But I'm not here to be okay. I'm here because I want people that I speak to know that I care about them. Like, it's not even just the message. I want them to know they matter. And you can't make people believe they matter if you don't know anything about them.
I love it. So, you know, I do think that this is a big part, and why I love having these conversations is because it's, you know, so many people think, oh, I just put together a slide deck and get up on stage, but there's so much more that goes into this. And, you know, one thing that I'm really kind of curious about, because I know we first connected back in the early days of social media. And I'm just kind of curious. I know you mentioned that you know, the topics you talk about have kind of evolved over the years. And so I'm kind of curious, you know, how did you decide when it was time to evolve your topics that you were talking about? And how did that influence into the type of people that you were talking to?
So I think that I've always been someone that could kind of see the writing on the wall. So for instance, when I was still working in corporate America before I had the marketing firm, I remember telling my boss, who was much older than I was, hey, there's this thing called social media. And this was like really in its infancy. So this thing called social media. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but I have a feeling that one day companies are going to be on there. And if a company gets on there, suddenly Coca-Cola can talk to the people who love Coca-Cola. And you can start having conversations between brands and people. Now, of course, we're all like, duh. But at the time, that wasn't a thing. And I said to my boss, give me as a side project, because by this time I was actually in kind of a marketing revenue generating position. I said, give me just a little bit of time to look into this. I feel like we can leverage this for the company. And Timmy looked at me and he said, look, kid, he said, you're cute and you make us a bleep load of money. And he didn't bleep. Stick to what you know. And that's when I ended up quitting a few months later to start a digital marketing firm, because everything in me said this is going to be huge. So when we talk about the evolution of topics, what I saw was that social media by itself was wonderful, but people didn't understand that it wasn't standalone. Social media is a medium just like a telephone is. There's no such thing as a telephone strategy. Telephone is part of your marketing. And so that's when I started seeing the bigger picture. Oh, wait. I can't just show them social media. Let's blow this out bigger and talk about the fundamentals, and not even just that, but how does mobile connect with social, and how do these apps connect with this? How do we look at the life cycle of a relationship and all the tools that you can use in sales or marketing or in HR? What are all the things you need to protect your company against and make sure your employees aren't doing, right? So that's kind of what happened. I'm one of those people, I'm really good at seeing what's going on the horizon and planning ahead of time. I'll give you a very funny story. I'm part of a association, and we had a meeting in, I want to say it was the end of February, I think to the very beginning of March is when we had our winter meeting. And while this winter meeting was going on, I was keynoting for this association that you also know of as well. I was having groceries ordered and delivered to my house, and mass ordered and delivered to my house while I was on stage. My husband was getting those things because I already saw the writing on the wall with COVID. Mind you, most people weren't even aware of the level of danger until mid-March. But at the end of February, I already saw the writing on the wall. And I was like, there are going to be shortages on things. Let me just go ahead and start ordering all this stuff ahead of time. So I got probably a 2 to 3 week bare minimum head start on everybody else. Not smart. It's just that I'm able to divorce what I want from what's likely to happen. And it's something hard for most humans to do. So that's how I knew how to spread. I started seeing the issues my clients were having that went beyond social media, and started saying, okay, how can I help them in a more holistic fashion, still focusing on technology, but giving them the full picture.
Oh, fantastic. And I know, I can't believe we're just about running out of time here. So I think that was a great way to kind of, wrap it up, because it was so, I think you just said that so eloquently. But before we go, can you just explain to people where they can find you online, how they can connect with you?
Sure. Anyone who's interested in sending me an email, maybe you have an additional question, or connecting with me on social media, just go to my website, Crystal, spelled like a noun, Crystal Washington, the only way to spell Washington.com. And then from there, you'll see all my social media links. You'll be able to email me, whatever you need from me, it's all there.
Oh, well, thank you, Crystal. And thanks everybody for watching. And if you are watching for the first time, this is the moment where I am going to say goodbye on YouTube, but I'm going to ask Crystal to stick around for one additional question, and we will send this out to our email subscribers exclusively. So if you want to head over to speaking.business and join the community, it doesn't cost anything. Register for the email list, and you will be getting the exclusive content that we're going to record right now. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for